When Ananda approaches the wanderer, Sandaka welcomes him, asks him to be seated. Okay, then after a little exchange, after a little exchange of courteous talk, then Sandaka asks Ananda whether he would give them a talk on the Dharma that he follows, the Dharma of the Buddha. Okay, so Ananda says that he's willing to do so, and then he starts to speak. And here Ananda is going to offer a very useful classification of 8 types of spiritual life which were being propounded and expounded by different teachers during the Buddha's time. Sometimes people with a superficial knowledge of India in the Buddha's time think that on the one hand there were the Brahmins, and on the other hand the Buddha, or maybe the Buddha and the Jains, who were opposed to the Brahmins. But actually in India during the Buddha's time there were 2 main, let's say, cultural centers of India. One main cultural center was located on, it's called the Kuru Plains, which is more in central northern India. It's in the area that corresponds roughly to where Delhi is today. And in this area, and maybe a wide radius of which that area was the center, the Brahminic culture was dominant. But in East India, what is called the Ganges Plain, the area of the states of Magadha and Kosala belonged to the same area, further to the north. The Brahmins didn't seem to be especially prominent. Brahmanism was spreading to that area, and the Brahmins were increasingly making their influence and their point of view felt and listened to. But the dominant religious culture of that area centered around the samanas. The samanas were the ascetics who had left the household life for a life of renunciation, and they accepted and expounded a wide range of beliefs, philosophies, and practices, quite different from that of Brahmanism. And so when the Buddha appeared on the scene, he lived primarily in the states of, well, first he came from the Sakyan Republic, which was pretty far in the northeast. And when he pursued his ascetic life, he descended downwards from the Sakyan state, the Sakyan state to the state of Magadha, where Bodh Gaya was located in the state of Magadha. And he had his main monasteries in the northeast, mainly in Rajagaha, which was the capital of the state of Magadha. That was the bamboo grove. And then further to the north in the state of Kosala, which had its capital in the city of Savatthi. And that was the Jetavana, Prince Jeta's grove, or the monastery that was established by Anathapindika. Kosambi, I believe, is still further to the west, but it still belongs to the, let's say, to the northeastern religious culture rather than to the central Indian religious culture. Okay, and so when the Buddha was teaching, he not only expounded his own doctrine, but he also found it necessary, in a sense, to clear the field by pointing out the faults in other teachings. This is not for the purpose of, knocking down other teachers, but for establishing the distinction, a clear distinction between, we call this a wrong understanding of the human condition and a right understanding of the human condition, between wrong views, right views, between views that lead to a dead end, or even worse, to kind of spiritual anarchy and nihilism, and views that are capable of leading to spiritual progress, to higher states of rebirth, to enlightenment, and to liberation. We find examples of this. Probably the most prominent example is the first sutta in the Digha Nikaya. This is called the Brahmajala Sutta, where the Buddha sets out a scheme of classifying the views in terms of 62 types of views, which include views about the past, views about the future. And then the second sutta in the Digha Nikaya, the Samanyapala Sutta, the discourse on the fruits of recluseship, begins with a long section which offers a kind of indirect critique of 6 teachers who were contemporary with the Buddha. And then in the Majjhima Nikaya, we also find sutta number 102, I think it is. It's called the 5 and 3, the Panchataya Sutta, which offers another scheme similar to that of the Brahmajala Sutta, but more concise for classifying the different types of views that the Buddha rejected. In this sutta, Ananda develops a scheme, an 8-fold scheme, that we don't find coming directly from the Buddha, but it's based on principles that are clearly in accord with the Buddha's teachings. So here the Venerable Ananda is going to speak about, not so much in terms of philosophical, well, actually they do become philosophical views, but he speaks about ways, whole ways of spiritual practice, whole systems, which he classifies first into 2 main categories. One are called ways that negate the living of the holy life or the spiritual life. And then the second set are the kinds of holy life without consolation. That is, ways of spiritual life which one could practice. They're not self-contradictory, but they don't lead to liberation. So the ways that are not, that negate the living of the holy life, in Pali it's Does this show up in the back? Is this visible in the back? You can see it. Okay, I'll continue with this, though it seems this one is running out. Brahma. The spiritual life or the holy life is brahmacharya, and vasa means dwelling or living, and then the is a negation. So these are ways that are negations of the living of the spiritual life. Then the word asasa means consolation. It literally comes from the word which means breathing in. Maybe breathing in like we sigh, we breathe out when we sigh. But breathing in is a sign or indication of relief. And so when we get consolation, we can take a deep breath. But something which doesn't give consolation doesn't enable one to take that deep breath of relief. And so it's called anusasika, that which does not give consolation. And under each of these main headings, Ananda incorporates 4 ways, 4 teachings, 4 views with their corresponding ways of life. Some of these we've encountered before, but now we see them in a very neat and systematic method of classification. Okay, so Sandaka first asks them to apply, to explain those 4 ways that negate the living of the holy life. It says, wherein a wise man or a wise person certainly would not live the holy life, or if he should live it there, then he would not attain the true way, the way to liberation, the Dhamma that is good and wholesome. So he would not be able to attain any kind of higher states of realization. So now Ananda begins his exposition, and with the first type of negation of the spiritual life. And this is the case where a teacher holds this doctrine and view. He claims there is nothing given, nothing offered, nothing sacrificed. Of course, this doesn't mean that he's saying that giving something is an illusion, but what this means is that there is no point in giving, no merits in giving, in making offerings, in making, well, sacrifice here in the religious context means acts of charity, of self-sacrifice. That there's no result, no fruit or result of good and bad actions. Whether one does good actions, bad actions, they don't produce any karmic results. There's no this world, no other world. Of course, he can't deny the existence of this world, but what he's saying is that there's no other life beyond this one, no world beyond this one. And so even this world that we're living in now is not part of, let's say, a larger cosmic process in which there is life in this world contrasted with life in other worlds and other realms. There's no mother, no father. Of course, this person knows that he has a mother and father, but what he means, or what is meant, is that there's no purpose in helping and serving, in supporting one's mother and father. You know, everybody is on his own. This is a world of stark competition where the strongest survive. So why look after one's mother or father? Just let them look after themselves. There's no beings who are reborn spontaneously. This refers to life in other realms. No good and virtuous recluses and Brahmins who have realized for themselves by direct knowledge the nature of this world and the other world and teach them to others. So of course this person will see that there are ascetics and Brahmins wandering about who claim to have higher realization, but he would say, oh, they're just deceiving themselves, they're just fools, you know, going around in these strange robes and shaving their heads or wearing long hair. And, you know, they make claims to realization, but the claims are all just bogus, all just humbug. There's nothing to them. Okay, so that's kind of the negative side of his position, which is all the things that he denies. Now he comes to enunciate the view that lies behind those negations, which is a view of what we could call materialism, philosophical materialism. So he holds that a person consists only of the 4 primary elements. So that means the only thing that's real, that's actual, is matter. So we could see that there was a kind of materialism already, philosophical materialism in the Buddha's time. So the person, Of course, a person has a mind or consciousness, but that mind is just an accidental byproduct of the play of material elements. And so what happens to consciousness when the body passes away? Okay, so when a person dies, the earth element in the body goes back to the earth. The body disintegrates, turns to dust, and the dust of our body returns to the earth. The water of the body, evaporates and returns to the moisture of the air. The heat of the body gets dispelled and just merges in the cosmic or the global heat. And the air of the body just returns to the atmosphere. The faculties, the sense faculties, pass over to space, and that's all. There's nothing surviving that. And so 4 men carry the coffin with the corpse inside. They carry it to the cremation ground. Then people give funeral orations. Oh, he was such a wonderful person. He benefited so many people. Oh, he lived such a worthy, noble life. So as long as the body is on the funeral pyre, everybody is praising him, even though he might have been the village scoundrel, but somebody finds some good words to say about him. Then the bones whiten, and the burnt offerings end with ashes. So nothing remains about this person. Nothing remains to this person but the ashes after the cremation. And so he asserts, giving, is a doctrine of fools. It's the fools who praise giving. When anyone asserts the doctrine that there is some value in giving generosity, observing ethical precepts, practicing meditation, and so on, all that is just nonsense, empty, false prattle. And the reason is because at death, whether one is a fool or a wise person, one is cut off and annihilated when the body perishes. And after death, nothing else exists. Everything comes to an end with the death of the body. So this is very much like modern materialism. And now Ananda is going to explain how a wise person reflects on this kind of teaching. So first he reconsiders the entire view. Then he thinks, if this good teacher's words are true, then both of us are exactly equal. We stand on the same level. Like he's setting up himself up as a teacher, a man of wisdom, and he's looking at me as a pupil. But, if the fools and the wise are both cut off at death, how could he claim to be a wise person and think I have to learn something from him? We both have the same destiny at death. So we're both on the same level. I myself who haven't practiced this teaching, and he who is practicing it, and so on. And then he goes on to reflect that it's pointless or superfluous for this teacher to go about naked, to have a shaven head, to strive in the squatting posture, to pull out his hair and beard, since because this is a layperson who's reflecting, I live in a house full of children, I enjoy the various luxuries of life, and yet we'll both reap exactly the same destination, the same future course as this teacher. At death, we'll both be cut off and annihilated. So it seems from this passage, what do we get the impression about the lifestyle of these teachers? Does the lifestyle seem to be consistent with their teaching? Yeah, it seems puzzling, doesn't it? One would think that a person who held that there was, no survival of anything after death, no results of good and bad deeds, would be living the lifestyle of what's his name, the founder of Playboy, Hugh Hefner, or this guy who builds all the buildings in New York. Donald Trump. That would seem to be the lifestyle consistent with their view. But apparently, this is puzzling, at that time, even those who expounded doctrines like this, which are really radical, nihilistic doctrines, would still observe these even extreme ascetic practices. It's somewhat puzzling, and I don't know how to explain it. Maybe, this might be does anybody have any way to explain it, even if you just guess?
I think they see that as auto-discipline in life to live better.
As a
Self-discipline to live better.
But it would seem that they should have no... What do you mean by living better?
Being happy. That's the way they found to be happy, self-discipline.
I see. Perhaps so, but if they hold that everything is cut off at death, one would think that they would just enjoy worldly pleasures. Richard? Maybe take my announcement. Okay, now whoever gets the microphone uses it and then holds it till the next person raises their hand, and then the person with the microphone gives it to the next person chosen to speak. Okay, go ahead, Richard.
There were Stoics and Cynics who had this combination of views, and they generally would feel that they should be austere because they thought that unhappiness was caused by attachment.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah.
To this life and by interest in the status system and wealth and fame and power and so on. And so they thought that all of those concerns were foolish.
Yeah.
And that people should abandon them and that they were meaningless. Dogs live better, cynics thought. And so one should withdraw from society and have contempt for social forms. Live this way even though they didn't think they were going to live after death.
Oh, yeah.
Think that they were actually able to affect good deeds on other people.
Yeah. Actually, that goes quite consistently with the point you made. Barbara, did you have? Wait, take the microphone. It's Barbara here, up near the front.
I have a more cynical suggestion that in a society, it's probably true that somebody leading a renunciative life is going to have more status as a teacher.
Yeah, actually, that is true also.
People look to that as where wisdom is.
Yeah, that's a very good point too. And there's another issue quite closely related to that came to my mind. Let's see if anybody else has that same thought. Okay, then I'll say what it is. It's actually very, very closely connected to that. That in order to live the life of a wandering teacher, they need material support. And so people will provide them with a simple hut. If they want to live under a roof, they'll provide them with their food. If he's going naked, then of course he doesn't need any clothes. But maybe most of them didn't go naked, but they would wear simple robes. And so they would get some kind of material support because they were leading an ascetic life. If they just live as a householder, people will think, well, let him take the support himself by doing business or agricultural cultivation, but no need for us to support him. Then if he's working all day, tilling the fields or conducting his business, no chance to set out as a teacher. Okay, so anyway, this wise person in Ananda's view, as presented by Ananda, considers that there's no real, if we take that teacher's philosophy, there shouldn't be any significant difference between him and myself, the layperson living in a house with children, using the various luxuries of life. So then he considers it would make better sense to me if it read, what does this teacher know and see that I should lead the holy life under this teacher? So then when he finds that this way negates the living of the holy life, he turns away from it and leaves it. Okay, so that's the first type of negation of the spiritual life that a wise person rejects. Okay, then we come to, and this view, when it comes down in the text, it's often called Nattikavada. Yeah, the word nati means there is not. And so this is the doctrine of there is not. So it's the, there is not means there is no giving, no observing of precepts, no point in supporting mother and father, and so on. Okay, the second view goes by the name Akiryavada, which means the doctrine, literally the doctrine of non-doing, or the doctrine of non-activity. And this is, again, it's a quite morally, you say, morally pernicious view, since it holds that when one acts or makes others act, I think the implication here is when one acts for the harm of others or makes others act. When one mutilates others or gives commands to others to mutilate, when one tortures or makes others inflict torture, when one inflicts sorrow and so on, oppresses others, intimidates, when one kills living beings, steals the wealth of others in various ways, seduces the wife of others, utters falsehood, one does not do anything evil. And so if with a razor-rimmed wheel, one were to go around and make all of the living beings on this earth just one mass of dead flesh, one heap of flesh, one would not be committing any evil, and there would be no outcome of evil. If one person were to go on the south bank of the river Ganges, killing and slaughtering and so on, he would not commit any evil, and there would be no outcome of evil. And if one were to go along the north bank of the river Ganges, making gifts and encouraging others to give, making offerings and so on, because of this, there would be no merit and no outcome of merit. By giving, by self-training, by restraint, by speaking truth, there is no merit and no outcome of merit. This view seems, I have to say, it seems very similar to the first one. I don't really understand the clear distinction between them, but it seems that the key point in this view would be the denial of the validity of moral distinctions, ethical distinctions. The key point in the first view seems to be that there's no creation of karma which is going to exert its effect beyond death. would seem that the second view has the same implication as well, so that's why I don't quite understand or grasp the difference between them. But if anybody else has any thoughts about that, please feel welcome to speak. Okay, Richard, you take the microphone? Yeah, just pass it back.
The first one is neutral, whereas the second one is negative. It's like the second one is seeking to prove that there are no consequences, that there's no difference between morality and immorality by proving that there are no consequences to oneself for immoral acts.
That's the second view or the first?
The second. That is, you see, Periyar, for instance, who was the atheist in Tamil Nadu, used to go to Brahmin temples and break the statuary intentionally because he wanted to demonstrate that there was no ill effect for himself, and he lived to be 101.
What is his name? What is his name again?
Periyar, P-E-R-A-Y-A-R. He was a prominent atheist, and he got an enormous following because people felt liberated from Brahmanism because of his demonstration. Now, this isn't quite like that. It's he acted as this one. It goes a lot further. It's actually injuring people and showing that there isn't any ill effect. Whereas the first one has a posture of neutrality. Like, okay, you can't really do anything. It's not saying it's good to do evil to other people. It's saying that it doesn't do any good to do good to other people.
Yeah, right.
It's denying that there's a real relationship between other people, so that one person cannot benefit from another.
Yeah. Okay. And I guess one would have to be something of a... Well, I think presentations of these views don't come to us anywhere else except in the Buddha Suttas, because even the early Jain teachings were not written down until several centuries after the Buddha scriptures were written down. So we don't have any other key to the teachings of these philosophers. The Vedas don't mention them at all, I believe.
The second one really isn't so strange. There are people like this in India now. There were whole castes of criminals. I mean, there were criminal castes in the 1800s of the British period. There was a guy who committed 720 some murders in western Tamil Nadu, in the forests, who was a kind of folk hero, in the way that Jesse James.
Right. Oh, that was in quite recent, the last few decades, I think.
The thing is, when people feel oppressed by the government and by upper castes and so on, they can make heroes of people who
Yeah. Yeah, in later centuries there did come a sect within Hinduism, a kind of related to the Tantrism, which held that an enlightened person could commit any kind of transgressive action without incurring any kind of sin or unwholesome karma.
Yeah, the Anabaptists held that doctrine in the 1500s also in Germany. The
Anabaptists. Okay. In the Samanyapala Sutta, these two views are associated with different philosophers who are contemporary with the Buddha. The view of nihilism or materialism was associated with a teacher by the name of Ajita Kesa Kambala or Kambali. Ajita was his actual name. Kesa Kambali means that he wraps himself in a blanket made out of hair, the hair of the head. So apparently he gets people to cut off their hair and he weaves that hair together to make a kind of blanket or shawl in which he wraps himself because it's uncomfortable and so it's a kind of ascetic practice. Whereas the view of Akiryavada is associated with a teacher by the name of it's Purana Kassapa. Okay, then the wise person, again, he applies the same kind of reflection to this teaching, and he realizes that there's no point in trying to live the spiritual life based on this philosophy, because the principles of this philosophy undermine the very meaning of a spiritual life. Okay, the third view is technically it's called a Hetukavada, which means the view that denies causality, causation. And this teacher proclaims that there is no cause or condition for the defilement of beings. Beings are defiled without cause or condition. There is no cause or condition for the purification of beings. Beings are purified without cause or condition. So this teacher is holding that the ideas of purification and defilement are meaningful, but there's no causation behind them. Nothing to avoid, nothing to abstain from and avoid, to escape defilement, nothing to practice and cultivate in order to purify oneself. And so he continues, there is no power, no energy, no manly strength or human strength, no human endurance. And the reason, here comes the reason for this view, that all beings, all living things, all creatures, all souls are without mastery, power, and energy. They are molded by destiny, circumstance, and nature. And they experience pleasure and pain in the 6 classes. They have a theory of 6 classes of living beings. And the main point in this theory is that all beings are driven by destiny, circumstance, and nature. In other words, that there's a fixed destiny at work behind the fate of all beings. And so the reason why some are born rich, others poor, some have well-developed intelligence, others are dull-minded, some have good opportunities for advance in life, others have poor opportunities. This is all because of destiny, fate, or nature. And, it's like the moment we're born, our destiny is already written on our horoscope, and whatever we can do, we cannot escape our destiny. If the cards say that we're destined to be assassinated in Paris on August 23rd, 2013. I might make it a resolution. I'm not going to go to Paris on August 23rd, 2013. And so I'm driving through the Midwest and stop at a little gas station to fill my gas tank. Some crazy man comes at me, shoots me, I die, and I didn't know it, but the little town where I stopped to fill my gas is called Paris, Iowa. So you can't escape destiny. Okay, and then in the Digha Nikaya, this view is associated with Makkhali Gosala, but interestingly, in the Samyutta Nikaya, this view is ascribed to Purana Kassapa. So it seems that even within the Buddhists, amongst the Buddhists, within the different lines of textual transmission, there was some confusion about which view was being propagated by which teacher. But you see that if this view is true, then there's no point really to be living a life of spiritual self-cultivation, because I might be, observing full set of precepts, the precepts of a monk, I might be meditating 8 or 10 hours a day. Another person might be breaking all of the precepts and just enjoying life to the full. And yet, if it's his destiny to gain enlightenment, whereas my destiny is to gain enlightenment after 10,000, his destiny is to get enlightenment in this life itself, my destiny is to get enlightenment after 10,000 lives in the future, no point for me to strive so diligently. I could just sit back, enjoy myself, and wait for the 9,999 lives to go by, and then in the 10,000th life, I'll get enlightened. And this guy, he can enjoy himself, and he'll be enlightened in this life itself. And maybe it just occurred to me that maybe a contemporary proponent of the second view here would be somebody like, does the name Charles Manson still mean anything to anybody? I don't know whether people have forgotten him or those of the younger generation never heard that name. But he was the leader of a cult in, was it the Los Angeles area? In the late 1960s, he had like a band of followers. And they sort of had absorbed little bits and pieces of Eastern philosophy. And I think that they were taking some of these drugs, like psychedelic drugs. And then they developed a philosophy that, they could commit any kind of crimes with impunity. It doesn't matter, that they wouldn't be doing anything wrong. It would just be, expressing the natural order of things. And it's the fault of the victim that they were destined to be killed anyway. So as murderers, they're just acting as the agents of destiny. And so they went around, they killed a famous actress. What's her name? Sharon Tate? Did they kill anybody? Some other people too, I think they killed. Yeah. Very brutally too. And then when he was brought to trial, Charles Manson, he had these sort of wide open eyes, this bushy beard, and he would say like, everything's groovy, man, everything's cool anyway, everything's in order, just groove with it, man. Nothing matters, good or bad. It's all the same. Okay, now we come to the fourth view. This view, there's no special name for it, at least I'm not aware of any name. But in the text, it's connected with somebody named